There are billions of dollars that would be derived from oil, offshore oil production in the Santa Barbara Channel.
So if we don't produce it here, we're going to be importing it. And there's only one country in the world that uses more transportation fuel than California, and that's the United States.
You can count me among one of those so-called environmentalists. And here, I have a solution. How about a win-win? Instead of making it like a football game, instead of saying either oil or alternatives, let's use them all. Let's use everything we have in our arsenal to provide energy for this country.
I'm Jim Nelson, retired Vice Chairman of CalDive International. I've spent my entire 45-year career in and around the energy industry. I currently serve on the board of directors of 5 energy companies, but I'm speaking to you now as a member of the board of directors of SOS California, a nonprofit organization based in Santa Barbara. We started SOS California in 2007 as a way to educate the public about the environmental damage caused by natural oil and gas seep pollution in the Santa Barbara Channel.
It's the world's second most active offshore oil and gas seepage area, each year releasing about 80,000 barrels of oil into the coastal environment and very large amounts of methane and reactive organic gases.
It is the largest single source of air pollution that we have in Santa Barbara County.
Since 1969, everybody talks about the big 69 spill and Santa Barbara becoming the birthplace of the environmental movement. Very true, but we've largely put our heads in the sand since 69, while these seeps and these reactive organic compounds are leaking out into the atmosphere, becoming the single biggest cause of pollution in the county. And that to me is just, it's irresponsible for us to accept that.
The impact of this natural occurrence on the environment is substantial, and we believe the economic impact from the unrealized revenue that is basically washing away every day is significant as well.
Federal government has estimated along the California coast in total there may be as much as 14 to 18 billion barrels of oil and a lot of natural gas as well.
There are billions of dollars that would be derived from oil, offshore oil production in the Santa Barbara Channel over the next 30 or 40 years. The royalty revenue to the state of California would be windfall. It would be so great that it could pretty much wipe out the current deficits that California has.
In 2009, Jerry Taylor, one of the nation's most influential critics of federal energy and environmental policy, spoke in Santa Barbara and stated that developing California's offshore oil reserves would represent a $1 trillion mega-steroid shot to the state's economy. So the question we want to raise is, why is California not pursuing this option, particularly now in the face of this disastrous economic decline?
The environmental movement, at least in coastal California, has become dominated by an almost religious opposition to oil. And now don't understand that we will ultimately develop offshore California. It has to be done. The dream of alternative energy is something we all have, and it will eventually evolve, but not within a time frame that's realistic for our current lifestyle or our current lives. So the question becomes not will we do it, but rather will we do it at a time of our choosing when it could solve numerous problems, or will we do it when we have to because of outside forces, because we simply don't have any other alternative.
There's peer-reviewed science that's clearly shown that you reduce seeps around production platforms over about a 20-30 year period of time through production. It's been reduced by 90%. And that's the same seep structure that's creating this huge amount of uncontrolled reactive organic gases that go in the atmosphere in Santa Barbara County. And the way to deal with it is actually directionally drill it. You can do it from shore. You're not going to risk an oil spill, and you can provide enough natural gas to run the whole city of Santa Barbara for a year, and you can do it probably for the next 20 years. It's a huge resource.
It's not worth the risk of another blowout. That is what echoes through Sacramento regarding the question of developing California's offshore reserves. The technological improvements and safety procedures in California's offshore production are such that there have been no incidents offshore California in 41 years, none since 1969.
Well, California has been a leader in job safety for 50, 60 years, without question. And the reason that is because California was a very forward-looking place, and they saw the hazards, and they attacked the hazards. They didn't just sit around and wait for something to happen before they made the collection. Instead of being reactionary, it was anticipatory.
We really have a clear understanding of what kinds of safety objectives need to be in place.
We routinely complete underwater platform and subsea pipeline inspections. These are completed in strict accordance with the BOEMRE, which is the former MMS, a Mineral Management System, which is a part of the federal government. Every 2 years, every subsea pipeline here in the Santa Barbara Channel is inspected either by a diver or remote operated vehicle. It's very important to maintain the structural integrity of those pipelines, delivering either crude or gas.
In April 2010, the BP blowout happened in the Gulf of Mexico. Much has been written about what caused the blowout, and countless studies are still being done trying to pinpoint the cause.
In the Gulf of Mexico, BP was drilling in unknown territory, more than 5,000 feet of water, in an area with unknown geology. They took the risk. It turned out to be a bad choice. In Santa Barbara, we're not drilling in mile deep water. We're working in known territory, known geology, in shallow waters. So there's no comparison when it comes to risk involved.
One of the ships my company built, a well intervention vessel called the Q4000, was the command vessel in the Gulf that performed the top kill operation and plugged the well. Having said that, not knowing what ultimately will be determined as the cause of the blowout, I can tell you what we do know for sure. The problem lies between three functions: the equipment, the process that deploys the equipment, and the people that deploy the entire process. An excellent example was in the Gulf of Mexico, Hurricanes Rita and Katrina. Those storms destroyed 400 platforms, over 1,000 miles of pipeline, and yet because of the fail-safe procedures, there was not a significant oil spill at all. I know firsthand the incredible technological developments in the oil and gas industry. But as we all know, accidents happen. A good analogy is the aircraft industry. No matter how much money Boeing or Airbus puts into the building of their airplanes, no matter how much money is put into the safety process, procedures, and regulatory review of the process, and no matter how much money is put into training pilots, we still have catastrophic crashes with a loss of life. But that hasn't stopped the world from flying. Yet we stopped all further drilling offshore California as a result of the '69 blowout and enacted a moratorium in the Gulf of Mexico after the BP incident. With these two events, energy development in our country has been significantly limited. Other significant oil fields off the coasts of Norway, the United Kingdom, and Brazil have also each had a major spill or production incident during this period. Yet those countries, all recognized for their concern for the environment, have not implemented moratoriums. They fully understand and appreciate that developing their offshore energy fields is essential to their economies and the well-being of their citizens. No industry is perfect, and oil production is no different. But when you consider the tens of thousands of wells that have been drilled safely off our coast, with only 2 major incidents in 40 years, the United States has accomplished a notable safety record, and it deserves to be recognized.
For many years, I also inspected those offshore drilling rigs and onshore drilling rigs for safety. And in those days, even though California was way ahead of others in oil field safety, That was not true nationally or internationally. And many of the things that we developed here in California were adapted to offshore and international locations.
So my understanding is there's only been about 850 barrels of oil spilled since the 1969 spill off the coast of California.
Yes, it's been amazing. A lot of through the advanced technology, and not only that, the responsibility of the people doing the work. They take it very seriously.
So there's a 40-year track record off the coast of California of safety in offshore oil production.
Yes.
Not only is it good regulation to ensure that there are safety measures in place and constant safety improvement, because of course it's a process, and it's a process of learning what works and what doesn't. Not only does it benefit the environment, it's a process where there's been public input into these regulations. There's public input into every project that happens. And so those comments are required under law to be taken into account. So it is regulated and it is reviewed and it is improved on a continuing basis. Not only is it good for the environment, it's good business.
Let's look at the reality of California's condition today. The unemployment rate is one of the highest in the nation. Public education is ranked 49th out of the 50 states, and social services are being cut back at an alarming rate.
We are already in a position of crisis. State government, local government, all of us are suffering as a result of deficits. Just the state deficit alone in the fiscal year 2011-12 is $26 billion. And when you're talking about that kind of money, you're looking at not all the services that have been traditionally funded being funded in the way that they have been historically. So there has to be a way to look for increasing and enhancing revenue, or we're going to just have to cut service. That's really the only way that you can balance a budget.
We have to cut several $1 million from City College's budget, but the current forecast is we're going to be in a 7-year decline due to the lack of a tax base and the funding from the state. So with increasing the amount of industrial exploration out here, along with that would come a substantial tax base that could actually help education in California, particularly community colleges.
We need the revenues desperately. Our schools need the money. Our nonprofits can use the help. Oil industry has always been huge contributors to nonprofits in Santa Barbara, and we have it right here, right off our shore.
The school system, one of the vital things, can take as much as 45% of those revenues, which in the peak years are going to be over $180 million a year between 2018 and 2025. Those are significant dollars. That represents almost 45% of the total expense budget of the county, and it's something that most people aren't speaking to, and the fact is it needs to be addressed. These are revenues that are available to the county, and at the same time they enhance the environment in a significant way.
North Dakota reported unemployment at just 4%. That means that nearly every person who can work is working. The reason for this is the development of new technology. In the past 18 months, the directional drilling process has been developed further and is now able to extract oil from shale formations. Because of this, there is more drilling going on in the United States today than at any other time in the past 40 years. The reason for this is that the drilling is taking place on privately owned land. Individual states and individual landowners are choosing to produce their energy reserves and bring great relief to their communities and the state economy. And again, the reality is this: the potential for real jobs and real economic benefit for this state is a staggering number.
The oil jobs in Santa Barbara County are the highest paid jobs we have in the highest paid sector of jobs that we have in Santa Barbara County, full stop. Also represents the biggest taxpayer in Santa Barbara County.
From every dollar we spend on domestic drilling, without taking any risk, without putting any money up, we end up getting about half the profits.
There's simply no good reason not to utilize this tremendous resource in a state that is quite literally bust and with no other options for relief even on the horizon. On the other hand, there are many others who say that if we were to develop these offshore reserves, and all of the U.S. reserves for that matter, It would send an immediate signal to the international market, and you can be sure we'd all see lower prices at the gas pump. In addition, producing California's offshore reserves would put the state on the road to energy independence and greatly decrease the nation's dependence upon foreign oil at the same time.
God knows we need revenue for California badly and the U.S. And yet we, in my opinion, stupidly, inexcusably, keep buying oil from countries that don't even like us. Every dollar we spend over there, we get zero back.
One of the concerns that we have in California is with tankering of oil, and that has in fact increased. And most notably, it's increased by the amount of oil that we're now importing from Saudi Arabia. Fully 25% of all the oil that we're using in California is coming from Saudi Arabia. So when you take off in an airplane from LAX, look out your left window, and all those tankers that you see lined up, that's where they're coming from. And they're all going into the El Segundo refinery. But we need that oil because over 90% of the oil that we have in California is used for transportation fuel.
Back in the early 1990s, about 90% of the oil refined in the Los Angeles area refineries was domestically produced, and the projections are now around 2020, about 90% of the oil refined in the LA area will actually be imported foreign oil. And so we've seen a swing in only about 30 years, going from only consuming about 10% of foreign imported oil to over 90%, making California heavily dependent on foreign oil.
We have no choice. If we don't produce it here, we're going to be importing it. And there's only one country in the world that uses more transportation fuel than California, and that's the United States. So, you know, we have a world-class problem that we can't sweep under the rug. We've got to deal with it.
We just can't keep going the direction that we're doing without a sound energy policy. In California, the reserves that we have is an answer to numerous problems that we have in the state and the local economy. Again, I am an avid surfer. I enjoy clean, clear water. I don't want to see our channel jeopardized. However, we can do both, and we need both.
SOS California is dedicated to educating the public about the environmental and economic benefits available by opening offshore production. Our goal is to empower the public with scientific facts and research to fuel inquiry and a search for answers. The best agent for positive change is an informed public.
What we've learned is that the legacy offshore oil production that's been going on off the coast of Santa Barbara all these years has ultimately cleaned up the air, cleaned up the beaches, and cleaned up the water of our coastal environment like no other human endeavor has ever done. Future generations will always live to benefit from the cleaner coastline, beaches, and air that we've come to see come as a reality because of offshore oil production.
California needs to trust its own proven safety record and lead the way to responsible production of our country's offshore reserves. We could once again provide quality education for our children, good steady jobs throughout the county and state, and keep our government services intact.
We are faced with a crude reality. The state of California is broke. Yet the road to energy and economic independence is within our reach.